As the Vincast is a podcast all about wine, wine people, and wine culture, I cannot recommend enough one of our supporters, which is Vinous, the iPhone app which recognizes any wine with just a snap of a picture. All you need to do is go to www.getvinous.com/Vincast, download the app, which is exclusively for users in Australia and New Zealand for the iPhone, and you can utilize this piece of amazing technology to keep track of wines you're enjoying, and you can record a rating and maybe some comments about the wine and then share it with other users on the app itself, or also with other forms of social media like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. One of the great things about the fact that the app has been designed in Australia, it means that users in Australia can provide feedback. Maybe they have some technical problems, which do happen occasionally, and you can actually have someone, a real person, respond to your comments and feedback immediately and try and fix any problems that might occur. So I really do suggest jumping on there, start following some people, see what other wines people are enjoying, and you can actually find featured users like myself who are generally wine professionals or other wine communicators, and find some recommended wines. Vinous is changing the way that we enjoy wine. Hello there, Vincasters, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast for 2015. My name is James Guestbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and I am a wine lover, and I hope that you are too. And I hope that's why you're listening to the podcast. Just wanted to let you guys know that I really appreciate it when people send me messages or hit me up on social media, or even come up to me in the real world, let me know that they are listening to the podcast. They've enjoyed a particular episode with a guest or on a topic. And also I love hearing where people actually listen to the podcast. So some people have said they listen to it on public transport. Some have said they love listening to it actually when they run, some at work. And so if you listen to the podcast, tell me, what episodes have you enjoyed? What topics do you like hearing about? Where do you listen to the podcast, and do you listen to it with other people, or do you listen to it on your own? Make sure you do get in contact with me on Twitter at IntrepidWino or at the Vincast. Hit me up on Facebook, visit the website intrepidwino.com and make a comment there. Or even, come up to me in real life and tell me what you think. I love hearing from you. So for today's episode, I have got a really fantastic person. His name is Brad Hickey, but probably better known as Brash Higgins. And he is making wine with his partner out of the McLaren Vale. Some of the most exciting wines are available in the Australian market. Very eye-catching labels. I'm not sure if you've seen some of his wines, but if you haven't, you will probably never forget them if you see them. And he came on and talked about his background, the journey that took him from originally from Chicago through Portland and then New York, and then eventually in South Australia. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you listen all the way through so you can find out some of the exciting things that Brad is doing with his wines, and also how you can to follow and support him. So I will see you on the other side. Brad, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Obviously, you are based over in just outside of Adelaide, and so you were talking on Skype. And I understand, there were obviously lots of bushfires over there recently, as there were, in parts of country Victoria. You're not in any of the areas that were in danger?
No, we were okay. Our vineyards are very close to the Gulf here, so we're only a couple of kilometers from the water. It's definitely more Adelaide Hills that was affected by the fires.
Well, that's good. Now, as listeners possibly would be able to tell, you don't sound like you're from Australia originally. Where are you from originally?
I am born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, in the U.S.
Go Blackhawks.
Go Blackhawks. Go Cubs. Go Bears.
Oh, Bears.
The Bears, all that stuff. Yeah, sports town. And a really fantastic city to grow up in, really, right in the middle of the country, and big and bustling, but really friendly people, and right on Lake Michigan, which is again, a great place to visit and a great place to grow up for sure.
Mm. And was there any kind of wine or food involved in your upbringing at all? Like, were your parents interested in wine or food?
Yeah, definitely. My mom was a great cook. My stepfather was a really keen wine collector,
Okay.
and had a job, in fact, at one point in his life with a really good wine sort of importing company, and collected a lot of great old Bordeaux,
Yeah.
which, as a young sprog, was quite exciting to go in there and steal a bottle of Mouton Rothschild or something. I had no idea what it was. With friends and going out back and just getting hammered on like first growth Bordeaux's.
Yeah.
And but also, yeah, lots of really fun memories of growing up with my family. My mom and dad having multiple bottles over dinner and listening to music, and really kind of chilled out, really fun. Sort of growing up period, learning about wine, definitely was a big part of my background for
Well,
sure.
it sounds like, obviously pretty early on you got introduced to, the important things of life, which are, good food, good wine, good music, and, good company.
Yeah, it's nice. I mean, that's always kind of the fun part. I mean, I think family dinners are not always, and depending on the household, but for ours, they were always really, really warm and comfortable.
Yeah.
And they lead into like, here's 50 cents if you can name this tune type of thing. And so I got to know about jazz and started learning about different performers, and it was really a great experience. I mean, I really learned about how wine and food at the table could be really. Really powerful and really amazing. So yeah, good times.
And at what point in your life did wine become sort of, I guess, important enough for you to want to follow a career in wine, or was it sort of dining that kind of got you interested at first?
No, I think it's a good question. I think me in general, I always it was always in my background. It was always something that I would go into wine shops, and wherever I was traveling or whatnot. I would always be interested in the wines that were available. But it wasn't until I moved to New York later in my life, really, and started working in hospitality that I got really psyched about wine as a career. And until that point, it had been just sort of something I had enjoyed on the side.
What was it that actually brought you to New York?
Just probably the magnetism of New York City itself. I had spent a couple of years living after university and went to Paris to, try to write the next great American novel. And then went from there, came back home to the U.S. and traveled around and ended up settling in Portland, Oregon for about 6 years and really loving that sort of artisanal vibe,
Yeah.
that sort of natural beauty of Portland and
Was
and
Portland a real hipster city at that point?
you know what it was? No, not really. It was just kind of like you could still find houses that were right on on the outskirts of the city for $40,000 US, and
Right.
massive Victorian homes, and it was just starting, and that was in the early '90s. It was just starting to kind of burgeon. But it was obviously a no-brainer as far as like scenic beauty, and obviously great bookstores and coffee shops and restaurants and wineries in the Willamette Valley being right there. But I never got into wine there necessarily. I was kind of more just sort of riding my bike around and doing a lot of other sort of jobs like baking bread and brewing beer and biblical sort of jobs that were really fun. And I moved to New York just kind of to sort of get it out of my system. It was a place that I had wanted to sort of go to test my mettle.
Hmm.
And I had friends that were working in the magazine industry there. And they were constantly kind of saying, please come, please come. We think you'd love it here. And I went out there in 1996 to sort of start writing and doing freelance writing. And we went from there. And I got jobs in restaurants and worked in very good restaurants with Danny Meyer restaurant, Union Square Cafe, which kind of got me hooked on wine.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And what were some of your early influences for wine? Did you find particular countries or varieties very influential, or was it sort of the people who are introducing you to these wines that kind of got you really passionate about it?
I think in the early stages, I was really shocked that there was a career that you could do, that you could actually make something out of, and being in New York, I mean, it's hard to write stories about things and stuff. And I was really surprised that you could actually, there were jobs that you could like do wine lists and get into wine. So I, at one point, just sort of put my foot down and said, I'm going to do this. This is really interesting. This is the part of the hospitality industry that really excites me. It's the intellectual side of it. It's the side that I know I'll never get bored of, and I can constantly learn about, and just made that leap. So there was not really a region or anything that really kind of fascinated me. It was more like just that there was actually a career that you could go down this road and go, wow, I can buy wines. Wow, amazing. And sort of, by proxy, just sort of, build wine lists and do that whole thing. So that was really interesting.
I guess one of the benefits of being in New York is that it is, one of the great wine markets of the world. You get access to some really amazing stuff. There's a lot of really amazing importers, and you're going to get wine from all different parts of the world, and including the US. Whereas in certain parts, California, like San Francisco, I could imagine being very dynamic, but still pretty parochial in terms of their consumption of Californian wines, and thus you're probably going to be at the cutting edge and be able to see a lot of really interesting stuff.
No doubt. I mean, that was a big part. I mean, not anything about San Francisco, I have no idea, but in New York, the first job I took, the first real wine job, was at the St. Regis Hotel on like West 56th in Midtown Manhattan, and it was funded by, like, I don't know who funded it, but it was a fantastic experience. And the restaurant was L'Espinasse at the time, which was a 4-star dining room that was kind of, everybody was in tuxedos, and it was very sort of Louis the 14th,
Wow.
core. And I was just like, wow, exactly. I mean, just wandering around that room. I remember the first couple of days I was on the floor there, just being scared shitless, like, oh, fuck, bumping into people and just like absolutely in awe of the whole experience. But the learning curve in New York was fantastic. And in those restaurants in that day, that was in the late 90s, was, everybody came through that cellar door. Everybody who was in town, you got to meet a lot of producers, and you got to taste a lot of wines and see a lot of things that were just phenomenal. So a huge experience.
Particularly in the late 90s and early 2000s, that was a real kind of growth period. And so, there was sort of almost anything goes, and the wines were still relatively well priced.
Yeah.
I could imagine that, New York now is like a lot of other places. It's very, very competitive. Like the really, I guess the great wines are a lot more expensive than they used to be, so they're a lot more inaccessible for a lot of consumers. That must have been just a really amazing time to be actually, and particularly to learn about wines. You're going to be talking about some really passionate, talking with some really passionate people.
It was. I mean, to this day, those are that was the big growth in my wine knowledge. And this was before social media too, so it's a really kind of bizarre period. Like, there was so many things that if I was there now, right, you'd be like, look at this, I'm tasting a flight of, Merceau from Rouleau, and he's right here, here's his face. And, all that stuff was kind of like, you just did it all internally with my wine director at the time, Joseph Nace. And it was really kind of, really sort of these little kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It was just sort of like little gatherings, like 3 or 4 people tasting amazing wines, and they would all come to see you because you were a 4-star restaurant. And, I can't begin to explain how important that was as far as my palate and as far as, what I got to taste, for sure.
Did you have any sort of epiphany moments in terms of, a winemaker you met, or an importer that you really connected with, or maybe, a customer you served who kind of really made you think differently about wine?
Good question. Yeah, I think By the time I was in that position in New York, I was just so in awe of it all, and I had a really great hunger to learn as much as I could. I think anybody who goes on a in a restaurant that of that caliber wants to know everything about the wines on the list, right?
Sure.
That's the main thing. You don't want to go up there and be someone call you out on something, and it never happened. But it was always the biggest fear that you go up on the floor and someone would be like, "Tell me about the actual." Angles of the flow and Chambol, Mussigny, and something. You're like, I have no idea.
Yeah.
But it never happened. But for me, I don't know. There was no one moment that probably stood out as like, holy cow. I think there was many different moments and many different things that happened from that position. That whole first gig, that first job for me at the St. Regis really opened so many doors. And then once you worked in that sort of four-star environment, you were then sort of allowed in access into other restaurants, and that's what happened. My career then sort of catapulted into working with Danielle Boulou, and that was unreal. That was like amazing French, that whole French culture of restaurants on the Upper East Side. And then from there, I ended up working with David Boulay, who's an American chef and down in Tribeca. So once I actually entered into that sort of realm, anything could happen, and it did. It was fantastic.
Whilst you were working in that capacity, did you have the opportunity to travel much, to actually head out to some of the wine regions? Obviously, you being based in New York, the closest regions would be Long Island and maybe the Finger Lakes. But did you have any opportunity to visit producers and see it in person?
Early on, yeah, those early first days that when I sort of leapt from Union Square Cafe and was working at L'Espinasse, yeah, those were the sort of first things you would do, was go explore your local regions, and Finger Lakes and Long Island were obviously a couple of hours from New York, so you can make a big day trip out or a couple of days out, and everybody out there was really accommodating. As I kind of progressed and worked my way up into the sort of pointy end of the restaurants field, yeah, you got definitely trips to Burgundy and into Champagne or into Spain or into Australia. I visited Australia as a buyer. South Africa, those were very common in New York at that time, and it's very, very great part of the business to actually get to go and travel on trips like that.
So what was it visiting different parts of the world, and I suppose kind of going to the source, was that what sort of led you on the path that where you are now?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I was invited to come work vintage here in Australia by Chris Ringland.
Yep.
And I met Chris in 2004 on a buying trip when I came down as a buyer in New York, and with a group of like 30 US somms, and came down and met a lot of really fascinating people down here, and then also got a real taste and real fell in love with particularly South Australia, which spent a lot of time here, and
But did you express interest in kind of wanting to get your hands dirty, so to speak, or did Chris kind of say, "Have you thought about making some wine yourself? You thought about why don't you join me for vintage?"
yeah, no, I hadn't really. I was in New York and I was frustrated. I mean, I think like a lot of people when they reach this sort of pinnacle of their career. I mean, restaurants are tough work, and when you work in them in a sort of 3-star Michelin environment, they're every night it's like showtime, and I think that starts to wear you down after a while. As much as New York City is amazing and I love it, but I came to work vintage here, and I was so tickled that it was just like wide open spaces and really mellow and really really friendly. I didn't have any real designs to do that. Chris had invited me a couple of times, and Dan Phillips, who was also a big motivator in this element, who was an importer at the time, said, come and work vintage. And I think they just thought I'd say no because it was too far away. Like, oh, and I was like,
Like
yeah,
like a token gesture. Oh yeah, come to vintage.
yeah. And I was like, I'm there. And they're like, oh, Jesus. He said yes. So and that was it. It was kind of like, and that was such a relief and was very scary at the time, leaving my job and I quit working at Poulet and I just did not want to go into another restaurant job and I didn't want to go into sales in New York, which were kind of the sort of typical paths you would
Sure,
take.
sure.
So that was really
And you'd already done a bit of writing, which is another kind of path that some tend to take.
writing.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I
like
guess
writing
so.
about wine.
Yeah, no, I hadn't really done anything like paid work as far as that, but I was writing a blog, I think, which was just to see, so my mom could make sure I was still alive and things like that. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, so it was just, one of those things where I was like, I want to get out of New York so bad. And then Chris had said, come and work vintage or Dan, and I said, great. And I came down to Adelaide and spent 3 months down here, and that changed my life forever.
I'm sure it did help that you'd actually been here before. I can imagine coming so far. Um, and I don't know. I suppose in Australia we sort of have the perception that Americans don't really know that much about Australia and think of it as such a foreign place, so different. When in reality it's not that different. I can imagine, yeah, it's probably alleviated any a lot of the concern that you might have had.
Having already been here
Yeah,
was helpful, and I'd really already seen how much I loved it. It was the real scary part was being in my late 30s, making what seemed to be, the third or fourth massive life change. And that's hard as you get older to make that uproot and move. And that was the biggest part for sure.
but obviously you have put down roots. What sort of what was it that you made you decide to kind of go? Oh, do you know what? I think I'd like to stick around here and make a go of it myself.
I think it was timing, a lot of it. I think as we get older too, it's sort of like I had felt over my period in New York that I was there for almost a decade, working my way around restaurants and I just didn't feel any real connection. I felt like it was not going to be the place that I was going to call home.
Sure.
It was going to be something that I love being in and working in, and the excitement and the access to wine and everything. The real thing that probably made it for me was coming down here and just making that shift and going, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to sublet my apartment and give myself a little bit of a leeway here. If it goes horribly wrong, I can always kind of come back in a year. But making that move and having friends that rented my apartment while I was away, and then coming down here and then meeting Nicole Thorpe, who changed my life forever, for sure.
Yes, well, I can imagine that's a pretty good reason to put down roots.
Yeah, well, that was who knew,
Sorry, I apologize for the poor choice of words there.
right? Who knew? I mean, that was, I mean, clearly, standing in an airport terminal in Los Angeles, looking at, my flight times going to Australia. I had no idea that I would meet a woman down here that would really like me, which is, and that changed everything. And she still to this day apparently likes me, which is really good.
That always does help, doesn't it?
Yeah. So
And
that was a big changer. I mean, otherwise that would just be a tourist visa and had to go home. And the government said after 3 months, like, what are you doing? Like, you can't just go to New Zealand for a week and come back. Like, we're watching you. I'm like, really? They're like, yeah, what's going on? And I'm like, well, I don't know. I thought I could leave every 3 months and come back. They're like, no. So
yeah,
Nicole, I said, well, we have to actually probably do something about that. So, I eventually ended up getting residency and citizenship through that channel of the sort of de facto spousal relationship, which is nice.
Well, that is one of the good things about Australia. You don't have to necessarily get married, but obviously you have to prove that you are in a relationship, you live together, and la la la. The equivalent of marriage, I guess.
Yeah, genuine and authentic, I think, is how they describe it.
When we're nothing we're nothing if we're not genuine and authentic in Australia.
No, it's good, but they didn't really care. They didn't want to know that I could actually teach people about wine or anything. It was much more interesting that that I could make a fellow female citizen happy. That was more important. So I'm doing my best. I'm trying.
Is was she involved in the wine industry at all?
Yeah, so Nicole, her family had planted Omensetter vineyard, which we live on in
Okay.
1997, and had her own wine label called Thorpe Wines for a few years, probably 5 or 6 years for sure.
Okay. And so before you met Nicole, did you have the thought about having your own kind of wine you'd make, or were you just thinking, I'd like to make wine with other people?
Yeah, not really. No, I really had no idea at all what I was doing, which was really exciting. There was a real sort of wide open moment. And I remember Dan Phillips asking me, "What do you want to do while you're here? Do you want to make wine?" And I was like, I really don't know. I'm not sure. It was kind of like I just was really open to anything that came my way. And in the first few years that I met Nicole, I came in 2007, and we started dating probably after 3 or 4 months that I was pruning and kind of doing my sort of year in the vineyard, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of wine that she needed to move, and there was stuff here in the vineyard that we needed to approach, and so it really just happened by chance, really. I mean, that was sort of like, wow, okay, I can help. I'll try. I'll give it a shot. And she had her hands full with a water drilling company here that she had to run, and so it was amazing. And I was like, well, great. I'll help you sell your wines, and maybe I can learn about viticulture, and maybe I can learn about winemaking, and it just kind of happened from there.
Great. So sort of de facto married into a vineyard must have been interesting. What when you sort of started to look at that vineyard and think about the way you wanted to express it, what were your kind of influences? Did you'd obviously done a lot of research just in your professional career. Um, you tasted plenty of Australian wine, I can imagine, and what was it that sort of, I guess, pushed you down the path that you kind of now in terms of the way you make the wines?
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of like a fast forward to now type of thing. I really took a lot of time to learn about what was going on here, and meeting people and talking to winemakers and getting to know, people around the district that I could talk to and collaborate with. I knew that at some stage I would probably want to try to do some things that were a little bit different. There was parts of the vineyard that had blocks that we could potentially try new things, and that's what eventually happened. Is that we thought, well, it'd be interesting to put a new variety in here after 7, 8, and 9 vintages, which were really hot, really dry. What about something more drought tolerant, like either Carignan or Nero or, Cinsault? And Nero tended to be the kind of one that kind of show of the day, like, oh, well, that's available. It's came to quarantine. Let's try that. This feels like Sicily here. And that was kind of really exciting. And the moment that happened, that was the moment that everything changed for me. That was like, wow, I can actually do this. I can do a lot of stuff here, and maybe we can make some wines from this. And what? Wait, let's do something with amphora. Why not? We've been to Sicily. We've visited Coast Winery in Sicily, and so Brash Higgins really kind of blossomed from that moment. It wasn't something that happened initially. There's a lot of like 3 or 4 years here where I was just kind of like just watching and talking and like trying to figure it out which side of the road to drive on.
Yeah.
Before there's a lot of stuff when you move to a new country that you got to figure out. So 2011 vintage was the sort of first year that we had fruit from Nero that we put on the vineyard, and in essence, that was the first year that Brash Higgins was born. And that was the idea, was to sort of, let's try some different stuff. Let's do things that atypical to McLaren Vale and maybe to Australia, but let's ferment these grapes in terracotta, and let's find a potter who can do it locally for us. And I think the real Brash Higgins thing the whole vibe of the label and everything else we do sort of stem from that really kind of cool wet year, 2011.
Let's just take it back a little bit in terms of the source. Now, the Omensetter vineyard is in the McLaren Vale,
Yes.
which is southeast of Adelaide, not very far. Which part of the McLaren Vale?
Southwest. Yeah.
Southwest, is it?
Yeah, yeah. It's on the western. It's on the Gulf.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got my geography wrong.
I do it all
what? which part of McLaren Vale is the Omensetter vineyard in?
So we're on the southwestern part of McLaren Vale. So we're probably 3 kilometers from the Gulf. We can see it from our house. And yeah, so it's in clay over limestone. Powerful reds, typically from this region.
What varieties were originally planted on that vineyard?
Shiraz and Cabernet. So there's
fairly classic McLaren Vale.
Yeah, right. So 10 acres of well, actually 12 acres of Shiraz and 5 acres of Cabernet. And now we've converted 3 acres of Shiraz over to Nero. So that's what we grow here, and those are the 3 grapes that we use for Brash Higgins.
Was it a hard decision to graft or to work with an entirely new variety, particularly for the region?
No, I was ecstatic. Are you kidding me? That was like the greatest moment ever. It was like, wow, we can plant new things here, and that was a real eye opener. And I swear that's really kind of the way that Brash Higgins developed from that moment of like, wow, we can do interesting work here for like research, like for the district. Go, hey, here's a new variety that really works well. Maybe it doesn't, maybe it does, but let's give it a shot. And that was really exciting as a wine guy, like going, oh, wow. And we can, and it worked out really well. And we made really nice wines from the first vintage in 2011. It was really exciting.
What sort of research did you do to think about how you wanted to express that particular variety? Did you actually have the opportunity to taste some Nero d'Avola? You visited Sicily and saw Nero d'Avola growing, in their particular part of the world?
Yeah, I did. I drank a lot of Nero in New York. That was quite common. The Regaliales and the Planetas, and those families had already had a good deal of Nero d'Avola and blends available in New York City when I was growing through my days in Manhattan. We had seen very little in Australia at all, but as soon as you walk out our door here, you can see commonality between Sicily and McLaren Vale. So
sure.
At that stage, it was a no-brainer. You give it a shot. I mean, really, the research that went into it was talking to Steve Pannell, and I love Steve, and he's such a really generous guy with his information and his knowledge. And walking around with an MW candidate who we were hosting, and he's really forthright and said, we might not be growing the right varieties here. We should probably think about southern Italy, southern Spain, or and Nero and Carignan and other things that can tolerate the heat here, and that really I paid attention and said that's a really good point. And then when those varieties and Nero in particular became available, I was right on it.
Okay. Did you think about other varieties like Aglianico?
No.
Straight to Nero d'Avola.
Okay. No. I was interested in Cinsault and Nero and Carignan were the 3 that I thought would be really fascinating. Mataro was also one, Mourvedre, which we would love to have some of that here, more of it. There's a shortage of it in McLaren Vale. But
in a Provençal sort of way.
Yeah, it's like Bandol.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We know where we are. It's not necessarily Cabernet world here. So those all up. And we're fortunately we're seeing a lot of those new varieties getting expression planted here. But Nero d'Avola was the first that we thought would be really a smart choice, and it worked out really well.
And what inspired you to work with terracotta amphora?
Just the experience I had in the wine business. I'd been to Grosvenor and Radicon and met those guys, and then I came here and I was thinking about Coast Winery in Sicily, and
Sure. Have you visited?
yeah, so we
Yeah, it's
spent a
amazing,
month
isn't it?
there in 2011,
Oh,
and
I was there in 2012.
okay, cool. Well, it was a very hot year, 2011. But we met and fell in love with the chef there, Pino Guarisi, who's become like a really good friend of ours and has visited here since then. And we loved it. And so we learned a lot about that there, and then also traveled up and started exploring Amphora and different vessels with Frank Corneliusen and Mount Etna. And,
Sure.
as you do when you're in Sicily, right? That's part of the sort of journey. That all happened, and it was good. It gave us some sort of like confidence that we could do something similar here when we got home.
And you were adamant that you wanted to have locally made, I'm assuming that it's locally sourced clay vessels made for you?
Yeah, I mean, really, it was a sort of a light bulb moment where you're like, geez, wouldn't it be easier just to find a guy locally who could do this?
Sure.
Like, I was looking at Spain and reading all about it, and I was like, that sounds like a lot of work. And I'd rather pay somebody here to do it. And yeah, so A plus B plus C. And we found somebody that could do it for us in Adelaide that was really accomplished as a potter. And so,
Well, I remember the same day that I visited Cos in 2012, I visited Ariana Occupinti, and I remember her talking about wanting to actually have locally sourced wood coopered in Sicily because she felt that that was, a better expression of a terroir. Did you kind of consider that for the Brash Higgins wines?
no, not really. It sounds nice. I mean, I wish that,
Well, you can say it now.
and we actually get the clay from the soil of the vineyard.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, you know what? Really, I'm not going to fuck with this potter's his thing, right? He's got his own clay that he uses to make pots.
Yeah, of
So
course.
here, can you throw some of my clay in there to make a difference? Would it make a difference? I don't know. Can we just put 1 cup of clay from my vineyard into this, your sort of blend that you use for everything you make? And I just said, no, I'm going to let this guy. He's the guy. He can do his own thing. But it's
Sure.
just, we got the clay is right next to our vineyard, but that doesn't really matter. I don't think it really matters. I think that's kind of a lot of bullshit.
Now,
What do you think? Really, do you?
for me, expression of terroir is about not intervening, and by taking it from the earth and putting it into the earth, that's a much clearer way to express the terroir.
I agree. I do think the wines that we make in those vessels are very soft, which is really
Yeah.
nice. And I like to drink those kind of wines. The softness is appealing. It's attractive, and that's what I think. At the end of the day, those vessels do so well. Argue whatever you may about they're valid, but they do make a softer style of wine.
Now, along that Sicilian theme, a wine that you have been getting a lot more attention for of late, that sells out super fast, and I know that your distributor here in Melbourne, John Pfister, a fellow American, has had to get some more out of you, is the Zibibbo. How did you kind of come upon the idea of making a Zibibbo, which, for those who don't know, is essentially it's a dry wine made from Muscat of Alexandria?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it has various synonyms. It's called Muscat Gordo Blanco in Riverland, where we source it from. Gordo, I think, is its charming name, which means little fat one in Spanish, which is kind of unattractive.
I didn't know that.
It's sort of suitable because it's a big fat grape, right? So it's like a
fat and white.
They're like golf balls. Yeah, I know. We found we had basically since the Nero d'Avola we were doing, and I think that wine sort of brought a lot of attention to Brash Higgins. Initially was that Nero and Amphora and new variety, new or old, techniques of winemaking, and we'd seen a lot of response to that, and there was kind of a matter of time until we thought about doing a white wine in the same vessels. And I had met and gotten along with a grower in the Riverland named Ashley Ratcliffe, who's a friend to this day.
Is that Wacky Grape?
Yeah, so Ricatera Farms
Yeah.
is the name of his site. I think
Okay.
he's dropped the Wacky Grapes
I just
moniker.
remember seeing that, like the name sounded familiar. I thought, oh, that's on social media. I think on Twitter, maybe.
Yes. So he's now Ricatera Farms, which is
Right.
cool. And that's the name of his vineyard in Barmera, in the Riverland. And he proposed this to me and said, "What do you think about? I've got some 75-year-old Zibibbo bush vines up here. That what do you think? You've made this Nero, this kind of really interesting wine, red wine." And I said, "Well, that sounds really great. Let's take a ton. I'll take a ton. I'll come up, we'll pick it, we'll bring it back." And we'll make a wine out of it. And we did that, and that was that was it. That was sort of like, wow, really interesting. Like, what's going to happen with this really aromatic white wine variety? We can leave it on skins for 4 or 5 months throughout the winter in our carport, and if it doesn't work, then nobody has to know about it. And if it does, then great.
And did you take the same approach with the Zibibbo as you did with the Nero d'Avola? Were you actually just sort of crushing and dropping all the skins and everything?
Yeah, that's exactly. So the Nero, I mean, I talk to people today and say the Nero d'Avola that we make here taught me how to make wine. I never went to university or studied winemaking. And I worked with some really smart winemakers, really good people like Tim Geddes, who taught me a lot about, winemaking, but they weren't really comfortable with like the ideas that we had in my mind, which were more like kind of like restaurant chef ideas. Like, why can't we do this for 6 months on its skins and 5 months and blend things and co-ferment and do all this stuff? So the Zibibbo was really based as the son of kind of the wine that came after the Nero. And we make it the same way without refrigeration or anything else. It just goes. Grapes come in, they're destemmed, they go right into these clay pots. It looks like a big jar full of gumballs. And then, they start to break down on their own. They go through their own process, and then we make wine out of them, and they're fantastic. That's it. That's how it works. It's really nothing more than that. It's really fascinating. The intervention is really just kind of punching it down during ferment when things are bubbling and kicking over. You knock it back down so it doesn't overflow. And then we make a decision when it's time to take it off its skins. And then from that point, the wine's already made.
And are you essentially just pumping the wine out of the amphora? Is the amphora buried in the ground? Or is it just...
No, I wish, but the grounds here are really clay and really reactive. So we've got above ground vessels to house the amphoras now, which is cool. We've got a sort of our own design for them, but they're not buried.
So can you just like essentially rack the wine out of the amphora using gravity?
You could. Yeah, definitely. So they're sucked out. So the wine is sucked out, the free run, that's on the top. Yeah. And then you're with all the skins, and that's just scooped out by bucket and then pressed. In the Zibibbo's case, it's pressed by hand through a screen door.
Okay.
Yeah, really fancy.
Wow, you've already picked up that Australian ingenuity.
I know. Well, we tried to do it in a press once, and it just squirted everywhere. It was like they're nuts. It's just like it's really the skins and everything are just like leaves that have been. It's really it's better to do it by hand.
Now, for me, the other really exciting expression of your wines is most definitely the eye-catching labels. How did you kind of come upon the idea of making these very, very these labels that really stand out on a shelf?
There's a game I used to play with guys and gals that I used to work with in New York about recognizing labels. The days we had off in New York, we would definitely go out. Most people didn't eat at home, and there was kind of fun to say, "Oh, can you recognize the bottle on the table?" So I wanted to have something that was recognizable, that was clear, and that was colored. For sure, using color. I didn't want to be shy about that. And then I had that was the kind of basic, plan that I wanted for the labels. And I ended up working with a really smart group of people at Swear Words in Melbourne, which is a design and graphic design business, really smart guys. And we started talking, and they became my sort of, conduit for ideas. And Shiraz was the first one, the Shiz. We were looking at traveling and thinking about traveling ideas. And I was, Brash Higgins was about travel and adventure. And we both looked at a sort of an airport tag for Geneva and saw GNV. And I remember looking at Scott Larrett, who is the sort of designer for swear words. And we were like, shiz. And we were like, yeah. And so, a week later or so, there appeared a shiz on a really beautiful background, and went from there.
Mm. So you've got NDV for the Nero d'Avola, and you've got ZBO for the Zibibbo.
This is kind of creating your own language. It's shorthand, and I think in a lot of ways, it's a lot of wine people know how it is to write shiz. Like, I need to order 15 cases of shiz, blah blah blah. So there was that sort of moment for me of like, yeah, I recognize shorthand and abbreviations. And then there was the idea of traveling in airports. And then there was the idea of color and landscapes and, the stuff that the rest of the labels kind of looked like. And so, yeah, and now we've got a template that we can work on and kind of do some fun things from the Zibibbo and from the Cab Franc that we make. And we can kind of play around a little bit more with the rest of the designs.
Mm. Well, I have to say that they're probably some of the most Instagrammable wine labels out there. I know, when the Zibibbo gets released, I see it on a number of people I follow's feed.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's good. I mean, design is important to me. I mean, art is important to me. Music, art, all that stuff means something. So
yeah,
I want to have labels that we can sort of play with and have different people that I like that we can do something with too. And that's the Zibibbo was done by a New York artist named Caravan Warden, who I've known since I was probably like 20 years old. So really cool to be able to bring people into my life and say let's try something, and that's where that came from.
And at this stage, is the wine only being sold in Australia, or are you exporting anything?
We are exporting. We export to the U.S. We do a little bit into Canada, into the sort of Rocky Mountain resorts up towards Banff.
In British Columbia?
No, in Alberta.
Alberta, right.
Kind of where the Rockies go into Canada up there. And then Omensetter, which is our sort of high-end top wine, so to speak, is exported into Hong Kong and into Shanghai. Sorry.
Okay.
So that's under cork and yeah.
But I suggest wherever you are, particularly if you're in Australia, go and see your local independent wine retailer. They should most definitely have one or more of your wines in there. We are sort of very quickly approaching vintage, obviously. How are things looking for the 2015 vintage?
So far, so good. We're really happy. It's been a nice cool break in the sort of heat spell that hit last week. So on January 15th, as of today, it's really, really cruisy, nice and cool evening happening here on the vines. Everything looks to be completely through veraison. So we're now at that sort of moment of 15, 20 days until we pick. So we're getting really excited. We're doing everything we need to do to clean up the winery and to, make sure we have everything in place for what's about to happen.
But you'll, I believe you're involved in various food and wine events and festivals in some of the capitals. What are some of the events you might be involved with in the next couple of months that people can definitely attend?
Good point, James. Thank you. Yeah, we're doing the Melbourne Food and Wine Festival on March 1st. Brash Higgins is doing a Perfect Pair event with Moon Park out of Sydney. So fantastic new Korean restaurant that a lot of people are enjoying and that I enjoy when I go to Sydney.
And wonderful sommelier, Ned.
Ned Brooks. Oh my God. Oh, can we say enough about Ned Brooks?
Well, he and Joel are your distributors up in Sydney, are they not?
They are. So Brooks and Amos distributes Brash Higgins, and by chance, Ned also is part owner of Moon Park, which leads to a interesting event happening in March 1st at the Melbourne Town Hall. So that's going to be exciting. That's 9 wines. So not all Brash Higgins stuff. We're doing 3 different courses and 9 wines along the way, and maybe a sake, something kind of fun. So to work with guys like Matt Young and Andrew Gard and other sort of importers to look for wines that could be really fun with Korean food. And our wines actually work well with those dishes. We've had really amazing responses to the Nero and the Zibibbo and how they work with kimchi and big spicy flavors like nori and seafood and seaweed flavors. So that's coming up. We've got on Valentine's Day the Vale Crew, which is Brash Higgins's part of a group of small winemakers in McLaren Vale that we all kind of pitch in and do a few events every year. And so the Vale Crew is going up against the Adelaide Hills Underground and the Artisans of the Barossa Valley.
Wow.
It's going to be fun. And then that's going to be on Valentine's Day on February 14th and Saturday in Hondorf, the fantastic German town in the hills. So that'll be a fun event where we're hoping to get people there.
All you Adelaide and surrounds listeners, you should definitely go to that because that's going to be some of the most exciting wines you can get in South Australia.
It'll be a great day. I mean, really, it's going to be a fun day of wine tasting, and Honduras is a beautiful town, so that's a no-brainer. And then after that, I don't know. We're going to do rootstocks happening in November, I think. So that's going to be a big thing for Brash. We'll hopefully be part of rootstock again in November, and then maybe a trip overseas to do some work with our friends in the U.S. and so forth. But those are the big events happening right now.
So what's the best way for people to keep in contact with you and make sure they're not missing any news?
We're pretty active on social media. I do my best to kind of get out there. So obviously Brash Higgins on Facebook or Twitter is a good way to sort of stay in touch. And beyond that, just come and visit us and just let us know you're in McLaren Vale. Come to Adelaide. And
are you on Instagram as well?
Yeah. Yep.
So just Brash Higgins. And no doubt, this is probably going to be one of the best times for people to follow you because I'm sure you're going to be posting some really interesting pics of vintage.
I am. Apparently, I'm a very good photographer. I don't know why, but we've got a very active Instagram account, and I love visual stuff, and that's going to be that'll be definitely humming over the next couple of months for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Brad. I really appreciate your time, and obviously, I'm super excited to get the opportunity to see more of your wines in the future.
Cool. Thanks, James.
And as always, thank you for listening to the Vincast. I have been James Scaresbook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Intrepid Wino, and also the podcast on Twitter at the Vincast. I've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/Intrepid Wino, and of course, as always, the website intrepidwino.com, where you can find every episode of the Vincast over the last few years, as well as lots of different writings that I've done about my travels and my experiences to do with wine. There are different ways you can subscribe to the podcast, so you can download the episode as soon as it goes up on iTunes, on Stitcher, and also on Player FM, which I have just discovered recently. If you do subscribe to the podcast on any of those platforms, please do share, rate, and review, because it really does help me out a lot. And again, as always, I would love to hear from you. But until next time, bye.